Who was that? Who was that?
That's the president we're missing.
Hello, Martha's Vineyard. Thank you for having us here. It's a great honor to be here with the president. We've done this a couple times. I want to confess up front, this is not a news interview. This is not a gotcha interview. I hope it will be entertaining. I have one simple goal. I want every person in this audience to buy this book, read this book, and enjoy this book. I want to thank Sue Ellen. I want to correct her on one thing we just learned an hour ago. It's 11th week on the New York Times bestseller list. It was #1 for 7 weeks. It's now #2, beaten out this week by an amateur named James Patterson. His new book, Texas Ranger, is #1. I think it's the only time in history an author has ever, on the New York Times bestseller fiction list, had #1 and #2. So we congratulate James Patterson, the president's colleague. The book has been sold in 30 countries for translation. We've sold it to Showtime for a 12-part series. So you'll be hearing a lot about this book, and we're very proud of it. I want to start by asking the only self-serving question that I'll ask tonight, which is, how did this come about, Mr. President?
When I left the White House, and Bob represented me when I wrote my autobiography, and he knew, we'd been friends for years, and he knew that I was an obsessive reader of thrillers, mysteries of all kinds. So he'd been trying ever since to get me to write a mystery. So sometime in 2016, he came to me and he said, you know, whatever happens in this election, your life's going to change. And I know you won't do this on your own. You'll just go back to work in your foundation. And what if James Patterson agreed to co-write one with you? Then would you do it? And I said, Bob, why in the living hell would he do that? I mean, you know, he's the best-selling author in the world. Why would he do this? He said, well, if he would do it, would you do it? I said, in a heartbeat. And Patterson agreed to do it. Said he was interested. So we met and we talked. And I said, look, if we do this, I said, I want to, I'm fascinated to do it with you. I want to see how you twist and turn the plots and stuff, but I want this to be a real book about a real issue, and I want it to be a thriller about something that could really happen. And I said, what do you want? He said, I want the president to go missing, can he? I mean, he's a great storyteller, Patterson. And I said, well, there are two senses in which the president could go missing. The first is, could the president be somewhere and nobody knows where he is, not the press, not the general public? The answer to that is yes, but not for more than 3 days probably, maybe 3 days. And I know how that would happen. I said, the other sense that you may mean is, can the president go missing, meaning be out alone with no Secret Service protection? The answer to that is maybe, but not very long, and it would really make the Secret Service mad. I mean, under the law, you'll find this if you get the book, but the law governing who can be covered by the Secret Service gives everyone but the sitting president the right to sign off Secret Service protection. However, for very brief periods, the president has, for privacy reasons, sometimes been given a pass. Like if you go to see a dying friend and they don't want any Secret Service in the house, or do something like that. So we started there. And I said, now, if you're going to make the president go missing, the only credible thing that this story could be about is cybersecurity.
Wait, don't go there yet.
Yeah.
Don't go there yet.
But okay, but anyway, that's how we did it. And so it
We're
was
gonna do
his
that.
idea, and that's why it's self-serving, but we had a great time. And I wound up I'm crazy about the guy. We had so much fun, and we still do. I mean, Hillary and I go to dinner with Jim and Sue Patterson. She takes her husband and me out to play golf and kicks the living daylights out of both of us. The whole thing has really been a great friendship.
Now, I want to come on to that. How did you work together? How did you actually write this? Who wrote it? How did you exchange drafts? I think people will be interested in the process by which you produced this work.
Well, first of all, I asked him, I said, how do you write your mysteries and produce all these books? And he said, I always start with an outline. He said, a lot of fiction writers don't, but I do. I may change it, and there are always twists and turns that occur to you as you're writing, but I want to know where I'm going. And he said, I know you write your nonfiction books that way. He'd asked Bob. I said, yeah, I do. So we agreed on an outline. We went back and forth, and we agreed on an outline, and we settled on basically where we would start and where we would go. And I said, now, and he said, you really want this to be realistic? I said, yeah, it's important to me. At least what I thought was realistic about how the presidency works, the White House works, all that stuff. And I said, it's really important. So he said, okay, here's what we'll do. I'll draft the first 2 chapters. You answer these 20 questions. He said, here's 20 things I don't know. And we can't make a realistic book without knowing this. And it was things like fact questions. If you wanted to sneak out of the White House, how would you do it? So I answered that. Notwithstanding the fact that this Kuko guy that wrote a book claiming that I sneaked out of the White House all the time with Bruce Lindsay, my counsel and 50-year friend, throwing a blanket over me so I could go to McDonald's. That never happened. But I explained, and then things like processes, how do they work? So I did my 20 questions, he did the draft. Then we went back and forth 5 or 6 times on the first couple of chapters because we wanted to get it just right. And the rest of the book just kind of wrote itself.
Now, the lead character in the book, and I expect by now many of you have read it, the lead character in the book is Jonathan Lincoln Duncan. You are William Jefferson Clinton. Is this guy you?
No, I didn't even name him. Patterson named him. No, I didn't. He is definitely, first, he's younger than I am. He fought in the first Gulf War. So he's a combat veteran, and I'm not. He's a widower, and I'm not, thank God. And but he sort of thinks like I do. And he sees the presidency as a job as well as a very important symbolic position. But he thinks about, how he's actually going to do things for the American people. And he is rather impatient with the politics of personal destruction that tend to dominate a lot of what we have thought about for 30 years or more. So, in that sense, I identify with him, but he's definitely not me. He also has a physical problem, a blood disease, which I don't have, thank God.
Now, you start the book, I think a lot of people were surprised, you start the book with impeachment. Why in the world would you start this book with impeachment?
It has nothing to do with me or with what's going on now. What do you believe that? What we were trying to show by starting the book with impeachment is the price democracy pays for extreme polarization and demonization. And we were trying to show what happens, because keep in mind, unlike either case, unlike my case or what appears to be happening now, in this case, the president admits that if he did what his adversaries think he did, for the reasons that they believe he did it, that it was an offense for which he could be impeached and removed. The English common law definition of impeachment, which is the closest we've got since it's not defined in the American Constitution, is offenses distinctly political against the state. Now, then he says, I am partly to blame for their paranoia because I did not tell them what I was doing and why, because I did not trust them to keep their mouth shut. And I thought that the country could be irreparably harmed if I did what they would otherwise deserve to know. There's a small committee of people called the Gang of Eight in the Congress that are designated to hear the most important secrets the country is dealing with. And he said, I simply didn't believe that they would do it. And so the book opens with showing you the price democracy pays when the well of trust runs dry. And that's the whole purpose of it.
Now, I want to ask you about two specific aspects of the book. The bad guy in the book is named Bach, B-A-C-H, and you write in the book, Bach is killed on every continent. Bach has assassinated generals, activists, politicians, and businessmen. Bach is known only by gender and the classical music composer Bach favors, and by Bach's 100% kill rate. And Bach is a woman. Chief of staff is a woman. The political advisor is a woman. The vice president is a woman. The director of the FBI is a woman. And that's not usual for thrillers. How did you and Jim come to the conclusion that you would use women characters in the way you did in the book?
Well, it was interesting because we sort of did it in the beginning without expressly discussing it. Like I said, I wanted this character to be a woman, the chief of staff. And then he originally wanted the assassin to be a woman. Then we had an FBI director that turns out to be the first African-American woman elected, appointed to that. But I think it's important because the closer we get to parity of representation in government across the board, the closer we'll get, in my opinion, to better decision making. I mean, basically, we know that I appointed the first woman Secretary of State, the first woman Attorney General. I have only had female chiefs of staff since I left the White House. And obviously, I did what I could to elect the first woman president. And so what I think is you've got a talent pool in America, and frankly, largely across the world, which is largely underutilized. And I think it has reinforces the sense of suspicion around a lot of all these other issues. I think we need to equalize the opportunities. And so but we actually almost instinctively did it, both of us did. And we were writing different parts of the book, and we wound up, I said, we got a lot of women in this book, it's good. And
now,
some are good and some are bad. I think the assassin is in some way the most interesting person in the book.
Now, another fascinating aspect of this book, I think, is presidential decision-making and the exploration of the very difficult choices a president has to make. And you write here, when the president has to make a tough call about whether killing a terrorist in the face of possibly killing innocent people, including children, you write, "Aren't we different? Don't we draw the line at conducting a military strike that we know will kill innocent children? Unintended consequences are one thing. This time, we know the results before we act." How did you, during your 8 years, go about making those impossible decisions like the one that Duncan faces here?
I think the only way you can do it is to ask yourself, if you're reasonably sure that if you take some action you know will result in innocent people being killed, that you're saving more lives. I'll give you the perfect example. When Saddam Hussein tried to kill the first President Bush, you remember that? Right after I took office. He was in Kuwait and Saddam tried to kill him. I talked to Colin Powell about it. He was then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I said, we can't let this go. And he agreed, but he said it was a very ham-handed assassination attempt, and you have to decide how many people you want to kill if you want to go after Saddam. And I said, well, who did this? He said, the Interior Ministry. I said, well, what happens if we hit it at night? Well, I said, we can't do nothing. So we hit it at night with long-range smart missiles, so-called. 3 of them overshot and landed in a prosperous Baghdad neighborhood, and 8 people were killed. And I hated it. For all I know, all those 8 people hated Saddam Hussein. But I knew that if we did nothing, he would go out and kill more people. And he stayed within his box for 8 years. He gave us, we had to have a no-fly zone. We had other containment measures, but it wasn't a problem. When we were involved in the air campaign in Kosovo, that went on for 77 days, I did my best to avoid any civilian target. They had already killed 10,000 Kosovars and created 1 million refugees. And there were going to be, and you remember how many Bosnians had already been killed by Milosevic, 250,000, by Milosevic's stooges in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so we did what we thought was right. One day we hit a bridge, and on that bridge there was a bus full of 43 Kosovar Albanians. The very people whose lives we were trying to save were killed. But people talk a lot about this, but you can't fire off big weapons and do stuff, I don't care how precise it is, and expect that there will never be any unintended and innocent deaths. So it's a very grave decision you have to make. You have to ask yourself, am I going to save more lives than I'm going to take? What are the consequences?
And if you haven't read the book, you'll find it fascinating how this president resolves
and this
it.
president wrestles with all this. He's got a particularly hideous, awful decision to make.
Now, the main threat in this book, which you wanted to be the central topic of the book, is cyber terrorism. And you issued, if I'm not mistaken, the first executive order on cyber terrorism in 1997. You write here that the danger in this book is the most dangerous cyber attack ever launched against the United States or any nation. It was designed to cripple our military, erase all our financial records, destroy our electrical grid, transmission networks, break our water and water purification systems, disable our cell phones, and more. There would be massive loss of life, damage to the health of millions, economic crash greater than the Depression, and violent anarchy in the streets. How real is that threat today as we sit here?
It's real. Every single one of those things could happen. Now, you have to think long and hard if you tried to do all that, because if you tried and missed, the blowback could be grievous. And so far, most of the cyber attacks on America by other nation states have been for economic advantage or national security intelligence. China's very good at it. The Russians are the only ones, as far as we know, that have done it for economic and security intelligence and to mess with the elections. The next best cyber attackers are probably Iran and North Korea. And North Korea is particularly dangerous because if you want to counterattack, you realize that they don't have much to lose. In other words, the thing that makes this so dangerous for any advanced society is that everything's now connected. So everything is cyber dependent. And therefore, you need to have a defense which cannot be overcome, or an immediate defense is directed almost simultaneously with any attack to minimize it. For example, to take out anything with a backup system, take our financial records, you would have to have a virus you probably planted in advance that could invade the backup systems as well as the main records. But there's a reason that this is a very fast-growing part of our economy. And one of the reasons we put Israel in this book as a country that we put Israel and Germany in as countries the United States was working with and consulting with, because the Germans have had extensive experience with Russian hacking and developed good defenses. And because there have been several years in the last decade in which Israel, as small as it is, has attracted 50% of all the new investment capital in cybersecurity in the world. And it's a very fast-growing part of the American economy, too. One of our events we did in San Antonio, which is the biggest center for cybersecurity firms outside Northern Virginia in the Pentagon area.
Now, you also paint a frightening picture. There are a lot of frightening pictures in this book, but you write about the fact that one person could destroy everything we've got. And you say, new technology allows even one man to inflict utter destruction. It takes only one man willing to destroy it all, willing to die if necessary, who's not susceptible to coercion or negotiation. And what you're basically saying is we have to get it right every time, and the enemy has to get it right only one time. How did you just mentally cope with that when you were sitting in the Oval Office? How can you protect against everything?
Well, first of all, you have to take all the known threats, right, and try to construct defenses. Secondly, for those things for which you think there is no defense, you have to construct a counterattack which would be grievous. The problem that a lot of very well-developed countries have is that if the attack is well designed, you may not have the capacity to launch a counterattack. So the question is, can you have whole alternative connection systems that have nothing to do with the internet, nothing to do with any other known connectors in the world? Then you have to have people, in my opinion, sitting around thinking about what hasn't been done yet. You know, there's that old saw about generals fighting the last war, and how many people died in World War I because they basically did face-off infantry warfare with 20th century technology instead of 19th century. So we had these massive casualties. So here you're not fighting the last war. You're by fighting the last war, you may be something that happened the day before yesterday. And you need people who are really good at this, who keep thinking of every new thing, who are trying to breach your systems all the time to protect them over and over and over again. And it's just the race. And we'll either figure out how to do this, or we'll figure out a system of mutually assured destruction so that nobody will do it. Or we'll continue to deal with things like we have dealt with recently. But when we wrote this book, one of the things that I was concerned about is that only Democrats would buy it because, let's say, oh, Clinton's just mad about the election. A lot of people who weren't for my candidate were perfectly okay with the Russians trying to get more people to vote for Jill Stein and all the crazy stuff they did. But that's a tiny sliver of the threat we face. Axios recently surveyed about, 15 or 18 national security experts, including several Republican and Democrat National Security Council advisors to presidents. And they asked them to evaluate all the security threats in the world, and they discussed 10. And they differed about, how big a threat Russia was or China was or whatever. But they all agreed that the number one threat to American security is cybersecurity. Now, we just had a $700 billion defense bill. And we spend about 5% of that on cybersecurity. And I think we need to spend more, because you've really got to figure out either how to get impregnable defenses or instantaneous defense as soon as you know something's amiss.
Now I'm going to take upon myself a real challenge. I'm going to do a lightning round with Bill Clinton. That has never been done. We did it in the '92 debate premise. Some quick questions and some quick answers. What's the one takeaway that you want people to come away from this book with?
This is a big issue, and every American should care about it and demand that we do as much as we can on it. There's no reason America, with its infrastructure and resources, should not be the best country in the world at cyber defense. You can have all the offense in the world. You're still vulnerable if your defense is not great.
Now you've read, I think, virtually every Patterson, because I've sent most of them to you. Other than this one, what are your favorite Pattersons?
I like the Alex Cross books. I like the Michael Bennett books. I love them. And I like this new Texas Ranger book. And I love the two books that he's written about the Australian female cop, Harriet Blue. They're really good, and they're good about Australia. You learn a lot about Australia.
Now, you've written several nonfiction books. What did you learn about writing fiction from doing this project with Jim? That sometimes you can create a more real feeling with fiction than with fact. That if you now also I learned I read the paper every day, and sometimes I see the facts seem stranger than fiction. But what I mean by that is, you can imagine. I don't want to talk too much about it, but our assassin, I love our assassin. And one of the things that we did was if you're writing a fiction book, according to an outline, you can find yourself, particularly if it's a thriller, so you got action sequence, pop, pop, pop. I'd call Patterson and kid him. I said, every now and then, I'd say, Jim, we've written 30 pages. We hadn't killed anybody in 30 pages. So But what happens if you're not careful writing action books is you get to the end of the road and all these people seem like cartoons.
They may be attractive cartoons or scary cartoons, but they don't seem like people. That's one of the things that's wrong with politics, too. But what I liked about fiction that I didn't think about is that you can keep, it's like painting, it's like having a painting on an easel that you just keep going back to, and you can make it deeper and more textured. And we just decided to make something out of the assassin, and I think she winds up being one of the most interesting characters in the book. And it just happened as a side conversation. I said, Jim, you know, this woman came out of the Bosnian War. There are so many people like her, so many really impressive people who were young, men and women who were really young when this happened, who were deeply scarred by it. So she comes across as credible, and I thought it's interesting because one of the few things we were criticized for by a highly regarded literary critic who reviewed the book said this is a good book, but this assassin thing is crazy. Nobody believes this. Nobody's like that. She's wrong about that. And
Who would you like to play the president in the Showtime series? I'm for Ted Danson, who's here tonight.
That's good. But he'd have to dye his hair like me, you know, he'd have to, because this guy's younger than we are. I don't really care. I just want somebody who comes across as strong but human, and somebody who really cares about the country, who's, you know, trying to do the right thing against all the odds and trying to beat the clock.
Dennis Quaid did the audio, which has been a huge success, and
He did a very good job.
He was terrific. One more, and then we'll turn to current events. You guys thought I didn't have the guts to do that. Will there be a sequel?
I hope so, I think. I'd like it. But we're really, Jim and I are both proud of this book because we worked so hard on it to make, so when you read this, you'll have a sense of how the White House works. You'll have a sense of how the national security decision-making process works. And you'll have a sense of just how challenging this cybersecurity issue is, as well as all the ins and outs, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, up and down, and all that kind of stuff. So if we could use this format to deal with another genuine challenge like that, I'd love to do it. And it's fun. I mean, I always liked him, but I like him more now that I know him better. He's an extraordinary person. And Jim Patterson gives a portion of the profits of every book to reading programs, to higher education programs and improving reading instructions, and to independent bookstores to supplement the salaries of their employees. And so, and Bunch of Grapes provided the books tonight, I'm glad to say.
David Sanger has written a terrific book about cyber terrorism and some front page articles in the last couple of weeks in the New York Times about the fact that we're now using cyber offensively as opposed to defensively. How do you feel about that?
Well, first of all, I recommend you read Sanger's book and Richard Clarke's most recent book. And if you're really interested in it, you can read his most recent book and then the one he wrote in 2010 and see how much hasn't changed and how much has. But I mean, these are, you know, pretty straightforward, easy to grasp, cleverly written explanations of what we're up against. So, after our book was published, General Mattis, the Defense Secretary, said first they were going to up their efforts in cyber defense, and then second, that they were not going to allow another assault like the assault we had on our elections without our counterattack. And how I feel about that is really good right now. But keep in mind, I haven't had access to the latest information in a long time.
Your security clearance been taken away?
It's just a matter of time. It's interesting. When I got out of the White House, the president isn't, the former president's entitled to security briefings. They can get the president's daily brief every day. But I never took it because Hillary was on the Armed Services Committee and dealing with a lot of this, and I was giving talks all the time, and I just never wanted anybody to confuse what I said with, secret government information. So most of what I know now, I know because I read a lot of newspapers and articles and stuff. But anyway, I would feel better about it. I feel good about it because I don't think you can let people do what the Russians did to us and pay no price. You just can't do that. And they should have been outed as soon as we knew. But the person who makes the decision to launch an attack of some kind, and this will all have to be worked out, I guess, in gradations. Should this be made in the White House, the Secretary of Defense, whatever. But you got to know what they can do back, and you got to be ready. Because our first obligation is to do what's best for the people in this country and for our allies and for others. We just got to be careful. But on balance, laying down and letting them walk all over you has never been a very good strategy.
I guess I'll ask you a political question. What do we Democrats have to do? What's the most important thing we Democrats have to do to win in 2018?
Show up. I mean, look, I can't tell you how important I think this is. We're in the mess we're in today partly because we had more and more of our voters who were more marginally connected to the political system. People with little kids had a hard time voting or whatever. And so we didn't turn out as well at midterms. Or we get discouraged or whatever the other side did. So what did? They won an outlandish number of governorships and state legislatures. And they set about making it harder to vote. There was a study that came out last week saying that 2 million Americans who were completely eligible to vote have now been purged from the voting rolls. 2 million? You won't need Putin if you let many more elections go by where people can kick people off the rolls. The computer app used to purge votes in Michigan, Wisconsin, and I believe in North Carolina and in Arizona was paid for by Robert Mercer, who finances Breitbart. I mean, and we know that it kicks a certain number of eligible voters off for the ones that have to be purged because they died or they moved or whatever. So you got to show up. We have great candidates now. We have amazingly interesting young people running. It's very encouraging. But we need to stop thinking of ourselves as a presidential party and start being a political party for people. And we ought to be out there talking about why don't we have an infrastructure program? Why do we have a tax cut that added $1.5 trillion to the debt and incomes have gone down for the last year and a half, not up for median incomes? Why don't we have a serious response to the opioid epidemic? Why aren't we dealing with the only real border crisis we have, which is fentanyl coming in from China on the east and west coast in cargo containers, and heroin from Mexico and cocaine from the Andes coming up from people who are not trying to come into this country, they just want to dump the dope. And we could actually deal with those border crises, but we'd have to work with our neighbors instead of calling them names.
Yeah, that's where I want to go next. It seems that over the last 2 years, we've gone to war with the UK, Canada, every friend we have. I'd like to hear Bill Clinton's view on why alliances are important.
Well, first of all, because there are a lot of problems in the world, including things that affect us, that we can't solve on our own. Well, let me just give you a couple of examples. The United States has done a heroic job thanks to the PEPFAR program, which was passed when George W. Bush was president, in leading the world's fight against AIDS. But still, more than half the money comes from other countries. We still fight this all the time. You know, my foundation's done a lot of work on this. So the virus continues to mutate. You can now see late-night television ads urging people to take precautions again because the infection rates are coming back up slowly in America. We need help around the world to do that. We don't have to do that on our own. If we spend more on defense, we ought to be happy that the United Kingdom and the UAE and Norway and these other countries spend more on development to try to promote health and education and to make more friends. We live in an interdependent world. We need more friends and fewer enemies. And I personally think that it's okay to call people out when I agree with what the global response was to Russia when it's obvious that they try to keep killing people in London. But basically, if you need people's help, bad-mouthing them is not a very good strategy. And you know, I don't understand how Germany became the enemy. Why aren't we learning something from Germany? The Germans have one of the two most highly rated health systems in the world, and it costs less than Americans. The Germans have the highest percentage of their workforce in manufacturing of any advanced country. The Germans are more trade dependent than we are. Why are we fighting with them? And they have certainly taken the lion's share of all the European countries and the United States of refugees from the largest refugee problem in modern times, which is Syria. And the UK, through Labour governments and Conservative governments, has been our friend and ally. And, you know, accusing them of wiretapping for something they obviously didn't do in the last campaign is not a very good strategy, I don't think. But apparently, there are a fair number of Americans who are willing to trade Europe and Mexico and Canada for North Korea, China, and Russia. I hope we have a good relationship with China. I hope once again we'll have a good constructive relationship with Russia someday, and I hope that the tensions on the Korean Peninsula will abate. But I think dumping your old friends who believe in democracy and freedom and actually try to help you solve the world's problems is not a very smart move.
The Clinton Foundation is a remarkable institution that got so unfairly vilified during the 2016 campaign. What is the one thing that the foundation has done that you're most proud of?
Oh, over a long period of time, I think the most important thing we've done is the Clinton Global Initiative, because while I had it going, we literally got people together for 12 years to commit and to do things that helped more than 400 million people in 180 countries. I mean, that's a lot. But I also, in our AIDS work, is now, the AIDS project I started has been independent since 2010, but I'm very proud of it. More than half the people in the world, of the 19 million people in the world who are kept alive by AIDS medicine, get it from contracts negotiated by our foundation. And we do similar work with TB, malaria, building healthcare systems. And then I like a lot of the things we do, smaller things. And in America, we raised $16 billion from public employee unions to finance our own little infrastructure program over the last several years, and it's created 100,000 jobs. And the government could do this by a factor of 10, 20 more. We need more modern infrastructure. And then, so we do a lot of big things and a lot of small things. I love the program we do in Africa with farmers. We have 155,000 farmers that we double, triple, quadruple their incomes. Why should you care about that? Because the largest amount of untilled arable land on earth is in Africa. We're going to have 9 billion people on earth. If they're hungry, that's bad for you. And there are countries that can have lots of money and can't feed themselves. Saudi Arabia has too much desert. China now has millions and millions of farmland acres that have been poisoned by chemicals because of pollution associated with manufacturing. So a lot of them, when they want to go buy, they bought a bunch of land in Ethiopia, for example, rented it, leased it. The Saudis did. And if they go in and just mechanize the farming overnight, what will happen is all those people will be thrown off the land. The topsoil will be destroyed and overused in a few years. And 5, 10 years down the road, the productivity of the land will be less. More people will be living in cities that are miserable and dysfunctional. And if you can teach these people to produce by doing literally things that were done in the United States during the Depression, which is what we do, you're going to stabilize the land, they'll take care of the land, and permit an orderly transition to more efficient agriculture in these countries. You should want that. So those are some of the things we do that I really love. The most important thing we do, maybe over the long run, though, is this leadership program I do with President Bush, 43. We pick 60 people, more or less evenly divided by parties every year, and young mid-career professionals. And they meet for months. They meet at my library, his library, the LBJ library, and Bush 41's library, discuss an important issue that we all dealt with, and then they take the lessons they've learned and apply it to current problems. And the most amazing thing that's happened, these people who, when we have graduation ceremonies, W and I do the graduation ceremony, the Republicans come up to me, and the Democrats come up to him. And they thank us because they said, I didn't know there were any people like that. I never would have met these people. And, you know, that's important too. Every year, 60 more gifted young people who are doing things in their community, who see each other as human beings. I used to tell the young people who work for me in the White House, they get so mad when those Republicans could call me names and all. And I'd say, just remember, if you scratch everybody hard enough, there's normally a person down there somewhere. And so I just keep scratching.
You and your wife have so often in your long and distinguished careers been the victims of the politics of personal destruction. And you write in the book, our democracy cannot survive its current downward drift into tribalism, extremism, and seething resentment. Today, it's us versus them in America. Politics is little more than blood sport. As a result, our willingness to believe the worst about everyone outside our own bubble is growing, and our ability to solve problems and seize opportunities is shrinking. Is there any cure for this?
Yeah. People have to stop rewarding it politically. I mean, either you reward it politically either by voting for it or by sitting out the election or believing what was shoved down the people's throat 2 years ago and what America's reigning expert on the relationship of the media to the presidency, Thomas Patterson, who's a professor at Harvard, he called it the information eco-structure a feast of false equivalency. No, they're all bad. No, all that. It's just not true. So we can start in this election with the choices before us. But we have to keep, and the politicians, they got to keep trying to give the election back to the people. If you think about it, if you ran a newspaper today, it's hard to keep a newspaper going. It is. It's hard work. Okay, so one of the things I've learned is that unless you're the Washington Post now, they were great at the end of the last election because Jeff Bezos owns them. He says, go be a newspaper. So they stopped telling us for the last month that the email thing was the most important issue since the end of World War II, which is literally what everybody else said. Look at the Harvard study. We're in Massachusetts. Look at the Berkman-Klein study. Emails got 30% more coverage than all of Mr. Trump's negatives combined. And it was, I literally don't have the words. As somebody who was responsible for the national security of this country for 8 years, and as somebody who has known my wife for a lot longer than that, and who thinks that she is the single most conscientious person I have ever known, when Jim Comey stood up and said she and 300 other people were careless with national security, I wanted to throw up. And the fact that no one would explain to the American people what it was, it sent me into orbit. But it was just politics because it was good for the business. Because one of the things I learned is newspapers, they have to go online and they have to sell online ads, and the number of ads you sell and the price you charge depends on how many clicks you get, and that depends on how many retweets your articles get and whether it leads the evening news. And I got a call the other night from a guy in California who had watched Hillary give a speech. He'd streamed some program. The speech was 1.5 years ago. He says, God, that's the best thing I've ever heard about doing something for the working class. And then I checked, and it was not on any television network. I said, she call anybody a name? He said, no. I said, out. So I'm sympathetic with it, but you have to vote for people, and then you have to demand that they give you the election. The election is not about the politicians and the people who are their interlocutors. The election is about the lives of the American people. And when we start voting that way again, everything will settle down.
Now, we had a brief cameo appearance from your wife tonight, and I'm going to ask you the question that is the one I'm most asked about Clinton world. How is your wife doing?
Great. She's first of all, we're grandparents, right? And we have Chelsea and Mark, my son-in-law, and our grandchildren are with us. And we just had a big birthday. And my granddaughter helped make the birthday cake for me. And my birthday started off with their idea of breakfast, eggs and birthday cake. So, not bad, actually. And she's doing a lot of work. She's helping all these women's groups, who are trying to get young people into politics and support causes, and she's just perpetual motion. She's still working on what she believes is right.
I want to ask one more serious question before we run out of time. North Korea. You sent Madeline there at the end of your term. it's fair to say you were pretty close to going. The clock ran out, and then Bush reversed the policies. Are we getting snookered there? Are we being played? Is there anything there? Please give us your Korea analysis.
Well, I don't know because they didn't say, anything when the meeting occurred. I was not against the meeting, but I mean, here's the deal. They didn't produce any nuclear fissile material when I was president because we made a deal with them with a lot of duress. I mean, I basically privately told the then leader who founded North Korea, Kim Il-sung, that I did not want a military conflict, but he could not become a nuclear power because North Korea is great at making missiles and bombs, but they can't feed themselves. So the tendency to sell that stuff or give it away is enormous. So we were all right for a while. Then at the end of my term, his son, who acted rather erratically, just like this young man did when he first got in, became more open to an agreement and sent his top military aide to see me after Madeline went to North Korea. And I was prepared to go. And I would have had to go to end their missile program, so I wanted to wrap up their missile and their nuclear program. But I only had 6 weeks left. And I didn't do it because Yasser Arafat, the only time he ever lied to me, promised me he was going to take the peace deal that I would propose. And I said, well, look, I can go in this missile program. I told him. And he said, oh, God, you can't do that. I said, I know I can't because I got to go to North Korea, South Korea, Japan, China, and probably Russia. And it's 12, 14 days. And you think I'll have to make it look like I made you take this peace deal, don't you? He said, yeah. I said, well, are you going to take it? He said, absolutely. He said, if you leave here without a peace deal, for me, it'll be 5 years, 10 years, maybe much longer. Well, it's now 18 years and counting. And I still don't know why he backed out. There are all these people who give speeches, I read about them all the time, claim to know. I don't agree. I know what I think happened. But anyway, yes, I was prepared to go. And he admitted, I said, you owe it to me to let me go because I've fought for you hard. If you're not going to do this, just let me go. He said, nope, we got to do it. And that's why it didn't happen. Whether it would have happened if I'd gone, I can't say. But I can say this. You can't just have them say something. You need a deal. It needs to be specific. It needs to be verifiable. You need to be able to check it. And we need to be able to, like any other deal, they need to be able to hold us accountable, and we need to be able to hold them accountable.
Last question. We wake up every day and we see tweets and we see indictments and pleas and investigations and politics of destruction. What makes you, two-term president of the United States, Bill Clinton, hopeful about America?
Near term, these amazing young people I see running for office and working in their communities and trying to make things happen. I mean, it's just stunning to me, the quality of young people who presented themselves for Congress, for example, or taken over a lot of these cities. Mayors of the 3 biggest cities in Louisiana are African-American women. They're one of the most Republican states in America, and they're doing things. We got a lot of great people running for office for Congress and the Senate, so that makes me feel good. First, every time I meet with anybody that's that's still doing non-governmental work, like my foundation does, I leave feeling good. And don't forget, the United States is still the best positioned country in the world for the 21st century. But we have to quit shooting ourselves in the foot. That is, we're relatively young and we're wildly diverse. And I could fill this beautiful auditorium with the studies showing that diverse groups make better decisions and build stronger economies and stronger economic units than homogeneous groups or lone geniuses. Now, so the native-born birth rate is static, stable. You may say, well, that'll be a good thing when we get to the apex of artificial intelligence and robotics, because we'll be killing more jobs than we create for the first time since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Maybe, but we're not there yet. We got lots to do. So therefore, we need more immigrants. We ought to get off this anti-immigrant thing, in my opinion, and pass immigration reform. Deal with a real border crisis, which, as I said, is fentanyl and heroin and cocaine, and embrace sensible trade policies. Look, a lot of these trade deals that were done years ago should be updated, but we're 4% of the world's people with 27% of the world's GDP. We got to sell something to somebody else, and we can't just bully them around. How did Canada become our enemy? We have a trade surplus with Canada. And how did the immigrants become our enemy? The crime rate of immigrants is lower than that of the native-born, and the small business formation rate of immigrants is twice that of the native-born. We need to just settle down, count our blessings, deal with climate change, and use it as a way to modernize the economy, deal with all these issues about women and men in the workplace and all that, use it as a way to democratize our society and our politics, and get our heads up. I mean, dear God, any other country in the world would kill for the advantages we have. The universities, the technology, the everything. Only the politics is getting in our way. And we just have to decide whether we want to fix it bad enough. And I hope you do.
I'll close by saying three things. Thank you, Martha's Vineyard. Read the book, and I wish he could run again.